So today's event is part of the Joint Learning Initiative's Fair and Equitable Dialogue series. It's a series of interactive public learning events that seeks to examine how faith actors can, should, and do challenge unequal power dynamics in the international humanitarian and development sector. It aims to create space for challenging debates and prioritizing local and often marginalized voices by examining some of the context and terminology often used in these debates, from decolonization to localization, as well as the history and context behind international and local faith actors. The series hopes to motivate a critical discussion that challenges power dynamics in the international aid sector and shifts power, resources, and leadership to local, national, and regional levels. And I'm just looking through some of the comments, and it's great to see that there's so many people from across the world. We have Ajit from the Pacific region. Hi, Louise, joining us from the Netherlands. We have people from Florida and people from Jordan. Thank you so much for joining this webinar today. And just a brief background into the webinar. The concept of localization of international humanitarian action, development, and peace building has gained greater attention following the 2016 World Humanitarian Summit. Localization can mean different things to different people, including notably engagement at the grassroots level, participatory approaches with local actors, community consultations, and adaptation to local context and sensitivities. A great deal of time has been spent on discussing what localization means and why it is needed, yet little focus has been given to its conditions of implementation on local levels from local perspectives. Moreover, the roles and contributions of local faith actors often tend to be overlooked or sidelined by international secular actors, despite them being primary responders in many development, humanitarian, and peace-building spaces. But where does localization succeed and where does it fail? How fair, equitable, relevant, and localization efforts are? What role does faith play in this context? Our webinar will be the second one to be held as part of the series, and it continues to the conversation we already started in the launch event in December 2021. In December 2021, the Joint Learning Initiative launched the Fair and Equitable Initiative with a public webinar on the role of local faith actors in the international humanitarian and development sector. Our first dialogue acknowledged the existence of asymmetric power relations between international humanitarian and aid organizations and local faith leaders. The engagement primarily brought out the need for participation of local and faith leaders in development projects, right from the planning stage, reaching the implementation. You can watch, if you're interested in watching the first discussion, you can find that on KAICIID's YouTube channel, which my colleague will also be pasting in the comment section. And the webinar will be a 90-minute discussion with 4 distinguished speakers with experiences from India, Myanmar, Thailand, South Sudan, the UK, and beyond. Through lived experience and case studies, stories, faith-inspired local international actors will engage in a discussion on how localization efforts are playing out on the ground and what role faith plays within this context. They will explore together locally rooted practical recommendations that can lead to a more effective, fair, and equitable engagement with localization and humanitarian and development work. So just to quickly start off, I'm going to introduce myself. I'm Hira Aftab, and I'll be the moderator for today. I'm the co-founder of an organization called Our World 2, which is an organization dedicated to rehumanizing the narrative surrounding refugees. And I have the privilege to be able to moderate this discussion with an incredible group of panelists. I'm also pleased to be in the company of some incredible speakers. So first, we have Professor Emma from the University of Leeds in the UK. We have Zabib, who is the Executive Director at Islamic Development and Relief Agency. Masumi, the Head of Program Funding and Partnerships in Islamic Relief Worldwide. Nonglak, the Program Manager for Promoting a Culture of Peace and Sustainability in Myanmar at Spirit and Education Movement. Swathi, or Dr. Swathi, the Assistant Professor at the Institute of Legal Studies and Research at GLA University and an International KAICIID Fellow. The full bios of the speakers will be posted in the chat as they engage in the discussions. So thank you everyone again for joining this webinar. Just to start off with, we're going to hear a few words from Professor Emma Tomlin, who will be sharing with us a few opening remarks on the theme of today's dialogue. Professor Emma is a sociologist of religious studies scholar whose work is focused on the broad area of religion and public life. She has a long-standing interest in religions and development and global development, including the gender dimensions of this relationship, Most recently, she has been involved in projects that also engage with the role of faith actors in humanitarian action, peace building, and health. She has mainly worked in South and Southeast Asia, and more recently, East Africa. If you would like to read some of the books she has published, she has recently published one entitled The Rutledge Handbook on Religion, Gender, and Society. And please, Professor Emma, the floor is now yours.
Thanks very much, Hira. And thanks to the organisers for inviting me to give a brief introduction to this webinar today. I'm really looking forward to the discussion and to hearing this great panel of practitioners and scholars reflect upon this very important topic. Now, the aim of better understanding the role of local faith actors in development, humanitarianism, and peace building has been the major focus of the JLI since its inception in 2012, and through its learning hubs and other initiatives and partnerships, it has made a very significant contribution to drawing attention to the work of local religious leaders, places of worship, and smaller informal faith-based organisations whose voices are typically underrepresented at the global level and are less likely to be captured in reports and academic studies than the larger faith-based organisations that more closely resemble formal NGOs. Through this work, the JLI has had much to offer the localisation agenda that emerged from the 2016 World Humanitarian Summit, where there were calls for humanitarian action to be as local as possible and as international as necessary. This has given a renewed energy for donors to partner with local organisations, including, at least in theory, local faith actors. A key aim of today's webinar is to better understand what processes of localisation look like from the perspective of local faith actors in different settings. Now, while a barrier to many local actors developing partnerships with donors and international NGOs is their perceived lack of capacity in the formal and professional aspects of development and humanitarian work, many are seeking to upskill in order to become legitimate development and humanitarian partners. And this certainly also includes local faith actors. However, local faith actors will often face additional barriers to their participation in formal humanitarian and development processes due to their faith identity. And this includes assumptions that are sometimes, but certainly not always, valid about their inability to separate humanitarian from religious activities, including from proselytization, as well as an inability to follow the humanitarian principle of impartiality. While some organisations might strategically hide or sideline their religious identity through careful choice of how they name their organisation, others might set up separate organisations to manage their humanitarian work and to keep it separate from their religious activities. So in this webinar, we're going to hear more about the experiences of local faith actors in localisation efforts and how they manage these challenges, as well as what this means for how they maintain their faith identity when subjected to NGOisation processes. It also seems that in much talk and debate about localisation, local actors themselves are rarely consulted about what they feel the process should look like, what works and what doesn't work from their perspective. So this webinar provides a rare opportunity to hear from local faith actors and others who work with them on this topic. So please let me now hand back to Hira, who's the moderator of this session, so that we can hear from our esteemed panel of experts. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Emma, for those opening remarks. And it was very important to ground kind of localization. And without further ado, we're going to start discussion. So the first part of our discussion will address two main questions. So these are going to be, how have local faith actors been engaged in localization efforts in the humanitarian and development sector? Or how does the element of faith or faith engagement contribute or complicate localization efforts in the humanitarian peace building and development work? And the second question will be, what obstacles have both local and international actors faced during localization efforts on the ground? And how have they addressed these challenges? But before we get started and hear from the speakers, we really want to hear your thoughts as well. We'll be sharing the link to our first interactive poll in the chat and the QR code will come up on the screen. You can use your phone number to scan the code. Sorry. You can use your phone number to scan the code or follow the link in the chat. Your answers will appear live on the screen. So please take a moment to do that now. Our interpreters will translate the questions for our non-English speaking participants. Please feel free to provide answers in your own language. And here are the two questions for this poll. In recent years, we have seen progress in advancing the leadership and voice of local faith actors. And please just choose whether you agree or disagree with this statement. That's great. That's good to hear that a lot of people agree. I'm actually quite happy with these results. Localization, there should be a lot more progress in advancing the leadership and the voice of local faith actors. So it's great to know that people actually think this is happening. And then for the second question, okay, that's great. We got one. It's agenda. So we have a couple of answers coming through. So secular agenda, that is definitely one. It's difficult to navigate as a local faith actor. We have resources, acceptance, funding, suspicion. That is another huge one within when it comes to international secular organizations interacting with local faith-based actors. Different language is always a problem. And yes, misunderstanding is definitely one. So thank you so much for your interactions. And those are some great answers that really explain what challenges local faith actors have to kind of face when they're trying to navigate the humanitarian and development sectors. So we're going to be sharing other interactive polls as we go through this webinar today. But for now, we're going to go to the panelists. We're going to hear from Ms. Nonglak. Ms. Nonglak has been working in international development for over 15 years with NGOs, INGOs, and UN agencies in Thailand. She has a background in migration and refugee, environmental development, and peace. Currently, she works with Spirit and Education Movement as a program manager for promoting a culture of peace and sustainability in Myanmar. And Nonglak's bio will also be shared in the chat for you to look over. And Nonglak, would you please, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. I would like to share our experience from our work, organization work. So as you already introduced about our organization, we work on the Myanmar issue. So in response to your first question, so I think the local faith actor, they are the first responder to provide the support during the humanitarian crisis, especially, for example, the crisis in Myanmar right now. So for our organization, we could not provide the support without the local organization and the local faith organization that we are working with, which our organization, we established our work since 1996. We provide the support for the Myanmar and Lao grassroots organization by providing capacity building for them and at least 500 alumni that we have throughout the region, especially inside Myanmar. So during the crisis inside Myanmar right now, we could send the staff from Thailand side to support people inside Myanmar and along the border through our trust network and partner. That's what we have an experience, and this is we really appreciate that the faith-based organization and local organization, they really help people. Supporting people by local to local is more quicker, rather than struggling with some, like, for example, waiting for the funding outside our organization, things like that. So this is what we have an experience. And so the obstacle that we are, a lot of obstacle, of course. What we found during we provide the humanitarian support for the Myanmar right now is that the international actors, they use a lot of languages that different from the local actors use. The keyword, somehow we don't know that people understand the same thing or not. The technical term and the requirement of the paperwork, submitting to request the funding during the humanitarian crisis is quite a lot of work for, especially for the local organization and the faith-based organization that we probably have the limited resources and limited time to provide those documents to get the funding and to provide the support for people. For example, this kind of thing that we found is the challenge. So we still have some struggling with this issue as well. But what we do, I can give an example from our experience. No, we also try to talk with the international actor that it's good that they're willing to support people, but we need to sit and talk and to understand and to hear the voice of the local people, what they actually need. And they don't have time right now. They run away and hiding in the forest, and they really need a quick response. So this is this kind of thing that we really need to discuss with the international actors. I mean, from between the local and the faith-based organization and the international actors. That what we found. And also another thing, the faith-based organization, the commitment, they have the long-term commitment because they are there. They are part of community. So no limit of the time or the project period. So they can continue supporting the people in the local quickly and no limit of the time. That's what I want to share first. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Nonglak. And now we're going to move on to Dr. Swathi. And Dr. Swathi is an assistant professor at the Institute of Legal Studies and Research at GLA University. She is also assistant professor of human rights and women's studies in Team Lease EdTech. She is an international KAICIID fellow. She completed her PhD in human rights from the University of Kolkata with a dissertation on right to education, a study on tribal women of rural West Bengal. Sorry. And to learn more about Dr. Swathi's experience, her bio will be shared in the chat. Please, Dr. Swathi, we would like to hear from you now.
First of all, thank you so much, GLI, for this wonderful initiative that has been launched with support of KAICIID. And thank you so much, Professor Ima Tomlin. Thank you, Hira, for this wonderful opportunity to talk with this wonderful panel. The recent scenario has been changing rapidly worldwide. India is not the exception. What we can see that there is a massive change in the political scenario, and political polarization is on high. So previously, what we observed as a researcher during our study, during our college days, that is not the same after 10 and 15 years. Current scenario in Indian context, the local faith-based leaders, actors, they are working very high. But the main issue for Indian perspective, what we can see, that as there are lots of Islamophobia and minority crisis is on high due to political operations, the acting opportunities is not the same as it was before. Apart from these challenges, the local faith-based actors as well as the religious leaders, they are working very, very rapidly for the humanitarian assistance. COVID is a great crisis for worldwide, but this great virus has created lots of opportunities for these faith-based leaders. We observed that in Kolkata and other parts of the India, the local faith-based actor, they are working, holding their hands together during this COVID, particularly. So that is quite an opportunity to understand people that you have to work together, otherwise you will be aparted. And that's a famous tagline that united we will stand and divided we will fall. So that's a famous quote, and that has been proved during this particular pandemic. In India, we observed that there was a humanitarian assistance rapidly by the group of young people who are supporting, like the Muslim people and the Buddhist people, also the minority people who doesn't have any kind of religious affiliation, but they are the tribal people, they're the indigenous group of people. They are working for the humanitarian and development cause during pandemic. They supported financially as well as with their working time, because time is money also. Not only always with the funding, but with their time and with their effort. They supported for the better cause of the better living society. So that is the basic example of living together in the society peacefully and coexistently. So during any kind of crisis, we can able to see there is a huge rapid inception and creation, the opportunities of working together. So here are the challenges that funding is one of the greatest challenge for the faith-based actors, first of all. Number two, sometimes agenda failure. They are not very much objective. They are subjective according to their organizational terms and conditions. So sometimes we need to find the object and the common object. That is very important to find out the commonalities within the religious affiliation. So with this commonality, we will be very much sure that we can able to achieve what we want. Sometimes we don't have money, sometimes we don't have opportunities, but what we have, that is a common objective, common goal. And with this, I'm sure that the faith-based leader, actor, they are very, very active in Indian scenario. And if we can motivate the political leaders into this, India will flourish within a moment. So this could be a greatest good example of the coexistence for the entire world, because India always believe in pluralism as well as secularism. We always believe that Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, that is the common goal for everybody. So this cultural commitment is also another part of the religious leaders. Culture playing a vital role in Indian scenario. Apart from the religious context, if we can contextualize and synchronize cultural commitment and traditional beliefs, that would be a wonderful opportunity for not only for India, but for the world. Here, I would like to stop myself, and I'm excited to be here. Thank you so much, Hira.
Thank you so much, Dr. Swathi, for your incredible response. And now we're going to move on to Masumi. She is the head of program funding and partnerships in Islamic Relief Worldwide. Masumi was also the global program lead for Islamic Relief Worldwide's conflict prevention and peacebuilding program that was implemented in Kenya, Indonesia, Pakistan, and in the Philippines. Our particular interests lie in promoting gender equality and justice, and the critical role that faith leaders and institutions can play in overturning the negative narrative of faith and religion as being oppressive of women. Please, Masumi, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Hira. Again, as a faith-based international development and humanitarian practitioner, so I'll be sharing more of how Islamic Relief has involved local faith actors and local faith leaders in localization. I won't go into the humanitarian response, I think, because Swathi and Nonglak has spoken kind of quite ably and very and have given us some great insight into that. So some of the other spheres where engagement with local faith actors and local faith-based organizations, where they could play a key role in localization, and particularly from our experience, has been in Islamic Relief. We've localized our gender justice program, particularly the programs to address sexual and gender-based violence, particularly because there is a clear tension between religion, not religion so much, but scriptures and how they have been interpreted by people in power, mainly men, in creating a particular narrative which perpetuates patriarchy, which creates or puts a power structure in place which gives privilege to men and boys over women and girls. So we've been working with local faith and community leaders as well, and engendering them to become champions and agents of change in addressing sexual and gender-based violence mainly through a behavior change process, which called Channels of Hope, which focuses on the examination of beliefs, attitude, and social norms which are rooted in scriptures and religion, at the same time building the technical capacity of faith leaders in gender-based violence, knowledge about gender-based violence, how to provide support to survivors, and also then meaningful interaction with the congregation in action planning and mobilizing a community-led protective environment for men, women, boys, and girls. And also Islamic Relief is due to kind of launch a gender justice declaration in Islam. And in the operationalization of the declaration, we are working with local civil society organizations, mainly in the global south, and particularly local faith actors, and building their capacity to advocate, campaign, and take action on achieving the achievements of the commitment, both of the commitments in the declaration, both at a local and national level. And again, I mean, working with faith and engaging with faith leaders provides a lot of opportunities, because in our work as an organization, we've seen that faith is, whether it's visible or invisible, it's just not a moral, it's more than a moral or spiritual expression. Traditional community structures and religious beliefs also provide support and a sense of identity, meaning, and security to people in times of crisis. And we've seen this particularly in the work that we're doing with refugees and internally displaced people in an initiative we have on two initiatives, one's called A World of Neighbors and one's called Welcoming the Strangers, where we have seen refugees turn to their spiritual and religious beliefs sustains them in their process of uprootment, forced displacement, and also integration into the host community as well. And the religion and its rituals also provide them a support network and gives them a sense of solidarity and personal strength, at the same time giving comfort through that link to home and the reassurance of the familiar, which brings about a sense of stability. So it is very important to recognize that the spiritual and religious beliefs of people and community are integral to their well-being and to their identity. And by engaging with faith and by faith leaders, we can develop programs and initiatives which are relevant, rooted in context, community focused, and also addresses the well-being of people, particularly in crisis, comprehensively, and just doesn't look at the material or the physical well-being. And particularly for Islamic Relief as an organization where our kind of strength lies in the fact that we're community focused, this is very important to us. But this is not to say that engagement with faith leaders or engaging with faith is smooth sailing in each and every scenario. We as an organization, particularly in our peace building work, we've seen that it can get quite complicated. Whilst on one hand, our faith faith values and our faith identity opens doors quite easily to Muslim communities. But on the other hand, when we came to engage with, or we came to be working with local faith leaders on peace building in the 4 countries you manage, which have all had experience of Islamist separatist group and radical Islamic teachers and teachings, we were viewed, and our peace building work was viewed with a lot of resistance and wariness, not just from the community, but also from the governments as well. So we had to do a lot of outreach and capitalize on our existing relations and history in these areas to overcome that. So yes, it is something we need to do. It is challenging. It's not always easy. It can get complicated as well. And regarding your second question about what challenges both international and local faith actors face in localization, and particularly in engaging with each other, I would like to draw some kind of learnings that we had from a project in which Zabib was a part of in South Sudan called Bridging the Gap. And one of the key learnings from that was, yes, capacity, and which also in the poll, it came out as well. Capacity is a big issue, and particularly in the context of South Sudan, and also a lot of other countries we've worked in the global south, for Muslim faith-based, very local Muslim faith-based organizations and local faith actors as well, because they're very small, they're not organized, and they're often not registered as NGOs. And this is complicated or exacerbated by a operating environment which doesn't allow room for the flexibility and support that local organizations, including local faith actors, need to engage effectively in humanitarian responses, and also a funding structure which does not allow, or which does not favor, investment in the long-term viability and sustainability of local faith organization. And it was a critical, and this needs to happen hand in hand with the capacity building element. And this was a critical feedback from the project. And another thing, which again, we, even as a faith-based organization, we are culpable to this as well. We tend to normally, within the system, tend to partner with local faith-based organizations, which are registered as NGOs, which understand the language, the systems and processes, and which, you know, they don't kind of overtly express their faith identity because of this constant tension between the secular desire to keep a distinction between faith and humanitarian and development. And in the case of South Sudan, I mean, we, amongst a lot of other stringent selection criteria for local faith actors to participate in the project, one of the criteria we put in place was that local Muslim faith actors within that project had to be registered with the Islamic Council of South Sudan because of the whole concern about links to terrorism. It made it practically impossible to kind of identify appropriate organizations. And even as an organization outside of this project, when it comes to the due diligence and compliance checks and assessments that we've put in place when it comes to downstream partnership with local organizations, we have put such high expectations that they could become discriminatory and exclude a large part of the civil society, because it will only be the large and well-established organizations in the local context who can ensure that end-to-end compliance when forming partnerships. It could mean that a lot of the very small and very local, the ones that are rooted in the community, would get excluded because they would not have the same scale and longevity as some of the well-established organizations. And also because they're very small, they focus on small humanitarian events and crises. So this again is again, both internal and external challenges from donors, from the operating environment, but also from internally from an organization, how we work. And particularly for Islamic Relief, it's quite difficult because it's a faith-based organization. And because, like Swathi mentioned, of the growing Islamophobia across the world, we have to be even more careful about who we partner with. And one of the ways we've tried to overcome this by what we say is working with and not working against, rather than assuming or adopting a process which is very top-down, working with local faith actors and local organizations in understanding what their needs, what the gaps are, what the barriers to engagement are, and then taking them through a process of nurturing and building their capacity, not just knowledge capacity, skills capacity, but also
conocimiento, de habilidades.
and getting them to
pero también de gobierno y llevarlos a un lugar.
إلى المكان الذي يجعلهم يدخلون في شراكة معنا، وعندها يتبين لنا أن التدريب المناسب للفاعلين المحليين في مجال الإيمان
les poussera à comprendre le système international et les critères et tout ce qui est requis de leur part. Et je m'arrête là parce que je pense que
فأكتفي بهذا الحد وأعطي الكلام للمتحدثين الآخرين. شكرا مسيمي.
And now I'm going to welcome Zabib to provide her remarks.
Thank you. Thank you, Hira. Sorry, I will not use my video because I want to keep my internet stable. IDRA has been engaged as a local faith actor. We've been engaged in various humanitarian programming in South Sudan. And one of them is, we'll talk of from the Bridging the Gap, as Musumi said. That's where we started from, as in coming out as organizations that are responding to humanitarian. Though at first it was more of a low response that we do very small activities. But since we were engaged in the Bridging the Gap, then we started coming out and the recognition started. And actually, we've continued to grow as an organization. And we've involved in assessments, humanitarian programming in the country. We are invited to clusters. We are invited to the leadership of several platforms that mobilize resources for humanitarian programs in South Sudan. And that is as a result of, because we are few and we are showing the interest that we really want to be in the space. And to be in the space means that we don't have to put our religion as the flag. We are Muslims, yes, but then we have not been given a chance to work as local faith actors. You have to come in a picture of an NGO and fulfill all the requirements of an NGO for you to fit into the humanitarian response program of the country. That said, we've been able to build a very good relationship with communities in South Sudan, especially the conflict-affected communities that we've responded to, that we have given assistance during their time of conflict. We've worked in Bor, last year's floods, we responded very well, and we were really doing well. And the other thing is that we've been engaged in peace-building programs and gender-based violence prevention. We are working very well in the women empowerment programming and women justice for women. So we are doing all this so that we can keep ourselves in the picture as local faith actors, and so that we don't die as organizations and die off completely. So we decided to come up with different avenues that we work into. And that is because we are trying to stay away from the issue of being pointed at that we are trying to convert people, the affected people, to Islam. So we've done very well in gender justice and gender programming in the humanitarian settings. We respond to gender-based violence cases in communities. And actually these days, we are being called on, especially when there are issues of sexual abuse, human rights violations within the Muslim communities. IDRA is called upon as an organization to come and tell us how this one works in the context of human rights, not in the context of Islam. Tell us what this means in human rights settings, and putting it to the Islam perspective. So we've been able even to take religious leaders to court. We have cases that we've taken to court now for sexual abuse by Muslim religious leaders. And still, the government has been able to protect us somehow from the bitterness of the Muslim community. Although in the beginning it was a tough time, that there were a lot of abuse. You people are westernized, you're coming to spoil Islam, you're bringing in your Muzungu, your white man's behaviors. So standing as an NGO or a humanitarian national organization then, at that time, not an LFA, we were protected. We felt so protected, and we continued with our work. And the case is still in the court. Though it has been adjourned several times, we have been able to hold them. And this sheikh has been able to be put aside, not to be allowed to lead prayers in any mosque in South Sudan until the case is resolved. That's one. The other thing is that IDRA has been called on, because of its name, to participate in the NGO forum as an organization, not as an LFA, and that's the issue that we're talking about, not as a local faith actor, but they look at us as an NGO that can really be capable to fit in the system. And last year we became actually the chairs of the NGO forum. And this year we said we want to concentrate on our work, and we contested to go to the humanitarian coordination team, and we got the opportunity. So we are building our name in that line. We are working neutral with the communities, and we've been engaged in several activities. We also submitted our report to the UN Security Council with regards to family laws in South Sudan and issues to do with the increased discrimination of women in South Sudan. So we have been doing both humanitarian and the development bit hand in hand. That said, we have also seen that IDRA has gotten the access. Having access to the grassroots has helped us to build our name at the grassroots and to build our name at the national level as really an organization that responds neutrally.
Thank you so much,
Yeah.
Zabib, for your comment.
The challenges that we face mostly have been, one is that the Muslim communities have put a heavy load on our head because they think that we are here to respond to their problems only. And the other issue is the funding problem, as everybody has said. And then there is that general lack of access to interested donors, to donors who are interested in the localization agenda. I'll stop here for now.
Thank you so much for that, Zabib. There were some incredible contributions for these two questions, and just a couple of points I would like to kind of summarize for this part of the panel. One was definitely that first responders are not given the same credit as international actors, and very often their contributions are overlooked, even though they have the most access to local communities, as Nonglak was saying in the case of Myanmar. And also another very important point is sustainability. A lot of the time, as Nonglak was saying, it's very short-termism is huge in international development and humanitarian spheres. And local faith actors have this incredible opportunity. There is an opportunity there to continue these projects far beyond their 3 or 4 year implementation period. And I think another important point was what Dr. Swathi said, as when we coexist, we can work towards a common good rather than focusing on differences, maybe focus on what unites us. And just to come onto the challenges really briefly, as Maisumi was saying, faith actors are viewed with suspicion, and whether they are trying to convert people or whether they are trying to radicalize people, it is a huge problem. And just as a small example from kind of the UK for Islamic Relief, there's a lot of people I know who do not give direct debit because you can track that. They will give them cash, but they will not give direct debit for fear of them being called radicalized or being called a radical Muslim. And just kind of coming on to funding restrictions, it is a problem, I guess, across the board. All of our panelists have highlighted this, and the fact that there is jargon and there's very specific reporting templates that are required, which a lot of local faith actors don't have the capacity or don't have the knowledge to kind of fill. So thank you so much for your incredible contributions to that part of the panel. And now we're just going to move on to the second part. And now the second part is going to focus on the jargon and the language that divides local faith actors and international practitioners. And it also questions how accountable localization is to local actors and to their identity. However, before we start the next section, it's time to get back to you, our audience, with another interactive poll. I also invite you to keep sharing any questions you may have with us in the Q&A box. We will share the link to our second interactive poll, which is up now as a QR code, and you can use your phone number to scan the code or follow the link, which will be in the chat. And your answers will appear live on the screen. And my colleagues should be putting that up in the chat now. So just quickly, from your own experiences, the first question is, what does localization mean to you? You can share multiple answers. And we're asking this question because localization itself is not a local term. It is something that has been brought in by the international sector. And we want to find alternative language to describe localization. So we already have some great answers. Sensing local needs, that's a huge one. And yes, definitely emphasis on local experts. And empowering the local communities is necessary to have the best outcome for local communities. So we have knowledge, empowerment, grassroots, context specific, and definitely trust local women. They're often left out of the many sectors. So thank you so much for that. And thank you so much for your input. And I'm going to move on again to engage with the panelists during the second part of the webinar. And there's going to focus on two main questions again. So the first one is going to be, there are many contextual and cultural divides between international and local actors, from the jargon and language that they use in daily practices, and they kind of use like during their work. How can we overcome these divides to use more accessible language and processes? And the second one is going to be the Bridge Builders research, which Masumi touched on briefly in the last section, demonstrated that local faith actors are sometimes nervous about NGOization or becoming in many international organizations and losing their unique faith assets and identities in the process. How can we refocus localization efforts to avoid NGOization and recenter the complementary capacities of local actors? Just before we start, could I please ask panelists to keep their answers to about 3 minutes, just in the interest of time. So Zabib, would you please, the floor is yours.
Hello? Yes, now?
Yes. Yes, please.
I would say on the cultural divides is I'm looking at it as an angle of there is a need of more collaboration and trust among partners as something that can bring out the meaning of localization. And empowerment of local faith actors on their areas of expertise to facilitate risk management by increasing sustainability of operation in their fields of work. Then also I'll talk of strengthen the existing coordinations. For example, religious networks, faith-based organizations, and building a good collaboration between the faith religious networks with organizations that extend their supporting hand to the organizations. And working with local communities at grassroots level to increase impact, and sustainability. And I'll stop here.
All right, thank you for that. Masumi, would you please care to share your thoughts?
Yes, thank you. Thanks, Hira, and thanks, Zabib, as well. You've actually picked up on a lot of the key points I was going to make. And I think I partly answered that question in my last one about how to overcome the challenges. And is again, the kind of not taking a top-down approach, because the model as it is at the moment, the partnership between local organizations, international actors, and local organizations, particularly local faith actors, is very kind of risk-averse and prescriptive. It is local organizations who have to fulfill or follow the competencies and the skills that are, it's a predetermined list of skills and competencies, which is expected of that, which is what is imposed on us by our donors as well. And so that kind of trickles down, and there is no space created to understand or to give space to the local actors for them to define and describe what their local capacities are. There's no space for that. There's no room for them to talk about that. And there is a hubris in that. There is this kind of erroneous conception or impression that international actors do things better than local actors. I don't think that's the case, at least from the Bridging the Gap program and everything Zabib said about what they have accomplished in an organization. I do not think there is any evidence to justify that predetermined conception of what local actors and local faith-based actors can do and cannot do. So what we need to focus on is again the complementarity, and also focus on and give space to the conceptual capacity that local faith actors brings to any project, and mentor them, support them, build their capacities. And then when it comes to language, another learning we had from the Bridging the Gap project was that focus, particularly when it comes to the principles of humanitarianism, for example, focus on the core meaning behind those principles. And one of the feedback that came, and a lot of the local faith actors said that we may not express ourselves in the same way you do, like say, for example, if you take neutrality, but within our context, we know and we are very aware of the harm that can be caused if we focus on particular social groups or religious group at the expense of others. So we are doing this. We may not espouse the same language or talk in the same way, but in our actions, we're actually emulating that. So there is no kind of divide in what we do as opposed to what the secular kind of expectations are or the standards are when it comes to working in humanitarianism and development. And again, as I think your second question was about the NGOization, and this is again a very pertinent tension. We saw that in the Bridging the Gap program, where a lot of faith actors said that you need to be careful about not eroding the faith identity of local faith actors as you're professionalizing and kind of building their capacity. And this was particularly critical for the local faith actors in South Sudan because of the political history of South Sudan to its independence and establishment. Within that, they already felt a need to downplay their faith identity. And I think Zabib mentioned that as well. So they could work as local actors, local NGOs, but they had to keep that very separate from their faith identity. And this is a two-way process. We need to build bridges and bring and establish linkages as well. On one hand, it's for international actors and also for donors need to understand the world, the complex world of faith and how faith-based organizations work without being dismissive and fearful of the religious and the faith element. And also they need to think through their terms, they and us as well as international actors, we need to think through the terms of engagement with local faith actors and FBOs, because not all are the same. We need to decide who are we going to, what is going to drive this partnership? Because like I say, like faith is a fuel for development and humanitarianism, and like all fuels, it needs to be handled with care. And I think local faith actors, faith-based organization and local organizations as well have a responsibility here. They need to have the courage to define for themselves and also for the outside world what their faith identity means and how this is operationalized. So this will give them an opportunity to ensure a coherence between what they believe, which is their theology of humanitarianism and development, and what they do, which is the organizational behavior and programs. And this coherence between identity and action is critical, not just for faith-based organization, but for all organizations as well, and both at local, national, and international level. So yes, I will stop there, and hopefully I've kept to the 3 minutes.
Thank you so much for that, Masumi. And just before we go to Nonglak, I'm just going to briefly restate the question. And it's just, how can we overcome the language divide to use more accessible language and processes?
In response to your question, in Thailand and Myanmar context, yes, the majority are Buddhist, but we also have other religions like Christian, and the diversity of the people, the ethnicity, which we use different languages. So this is the thing that, again, I would like to point out about when the international actors working together with the local actor, local faith-based organization. So we should simplify the term that we use and the language and those procedures that to ensure that everyone understands the word that you use, because we are from various backgrounds, belief, and also the ethnicity. So sometimes the words from the international actors when we providing, especially again during the humanitarian, providing the humanitarian assistance. So those principles, the key term, the words that we use, it should make sure that people understand and make it clear communicate with the local actors that the way we work, the communication channel is something that people understand and provide a safe space and the good environment to communicate to each other that can bring both working together. We can work better together. No? So that one thing that I would like to share. And to avoid the NGOization, so I think the local faith actors and local organizations, we really need to understand and identify yourself, and you have your own standpoint, what you are working for, what you stand, what you are working for in what issue. Because when, for example, we get the funding from the international organization, and then they come with their own agenda also. So how you manage, how we can manage their agenda and our standpoint of our work when we work. For example, we fight for something, some issue, the human right of the people in the community. So this kind of thing, I think if we make it clear in our organization and we consistent working on what we are doing, we shouldn't forget about
سوف تسمح لها أو سوف تساعدها على عدم نسيان الأسباب التي دفعتها إلى العمل عندما يأتي المال.
Donde entender que muchas veces las organizaciones que dan el dinero tienen su propia agenda.
Certainement, il faudra qu'il y ait un soutien, mais il y a également un ordre du jour bien particulier.
أن نتنبه إليها وأن نحددها. ومجددا بالنسبة إلى السؤال الثاني، يجب أن نعرف أو يجب أن يكون هناك تمويل، ولكن يجب الفصل بين التمويل والشبكة المحلية.
I think it should more than the outsider donors, because in terms of balancing the power of the money, so the funding that we receive. So if we can engage people to get involved and contribute to the organization, and that they agree what we are working for, then the funding that we somehow is also quite a lot of challenges about the funding. We all know about that. But if there's the way that we can raising the fund from our network, our communities, I think for the actually the faith-based organization and local organization, we raising fund from people that we trust each other, and then we can collect the funding to provide the support during the humanitarian assistance. So this kind of thing, I think, is quite important, that to avoid the INGOization and not giving the power of the money over our organization that much. Yeah, that 2 points that I want to share. Thank you.
Thank you, Nonglak. And last but not least, we have Dr. Swathi.
Thank you so much, Hira. Already Mausami and Zabib and Nonglak have rightly pointed out the question. Here, I would just add something, that is the using of language. So using of appropriate language with positive communication is playing a very vital role here. So we had a very wonderful workshop on nonviolent communication and the use of nonviolent words.
حول استخدام اللغة أو العبارات غير العنفية وكيف يمكنها أن تحفز العمل.
But with the body language, with the signing language, and with the positive nonviolent communication way, they can at least try to enhance their commitment to the society. So that is the one research we had done previously with the faith-based actor, researcher, and the policymakers. So we had a wonderful response and outcome from that particular workshop. And we are continuing with that. So each and every colleges, we are having this kind of workshop to utilize the appropriate word with the dialects, because in India, we have a huge number of language. So it's not at all possible to make all of them understand that what is the jargon said all about with their international flavor or international documentation sometime. So they may misinterpret sometime with the religious jargons or some phrases. So here we would like to have the interpretation properly. So 1 point is using appropriate language. Number 2 is interpretation, appropriate interpretation, because it's better not to understand, but not to misunderstand at least. So it's always to have the trust mechanism that what I am saying to you, you are going to trust me on that word. That is 1 point. For that, we need to create self-respect. Number 2, respect for others, because the question of identity will emerge when we don't believe on others' existence. That is a major thrust of any society. So here we are trying to do something on the research perspective, that is the using of appropriate language with a regional dialect, and how to reach with all people, all means all, to the sustainable development and accessible with a smart technology, because that is now very, very accessible. So we can have utilization of technical support. Like here we are having interpretation, so we can do that in a long run program. And second question that is very important, wonderful research have been done with a bridge builders research conducted by JLI and the partners. That has been demonstrated that hygienization, NGOization, that is very important, because sometimes they would misinterpret with their existence and they don't able to connect with what they were having the objective. So here I would recommend two things for Indian perspective at least, that while they're having this kind of issues with their identity crisis as a local faith-based actor or NGOizations, so here they could like to do, that is to address the core issue, the core problem. So in the local arena, which would be more significant to solve first, like while we had the crisis of COVID-19, apart from any religious identity or beliefs, they were been together to address the core issue, that is the COVID-19, to solve for the community and to work for all. The Muslim organization actually came forth and they opened their mosque for everybody to have the shelter. So that is the essence of the supporting to all, irrespective of the religious beliefs. That is a community participation. So that is one point, to address the core issue first, rather to have several objectives into their proposal or to any project. It would be better to have a concrete objective, so they would be more visible within the faith assets. So that is very important. Here I would like to stop myself, because I'm sure that we will have more discussion from the panelists. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone, for incredible answers. And there's just two things that kind of very stood out to me during this while you were answering. One is definitely like focusing on the core meaning. As Masumi was saying, even though they might not use the term neutrality, they could very well be operating with the same principles. As all major religions have, there is nothing that they all have a facet that says help humanity. There's nothing against helping other religions or other people. So I think that's very important that's a very important point to note. And then also having a very strong sense of self, because often when much bigger, better resource international actors come into certain local contexts, as Nonglak was saying, you have to remember what your core focus is, who your communities are, and who you're trying to help. And I think that's a very important point to make. And now we're just going to quickly move on to the next session of the webinar. I know we're kind of pressed for time, so I would just like to ask each speaker very briefly to kind of say a final word on, as faith-inspired practitioners, what do you recommend for the localization approach to work in practice? And can we finally walk the talk? I would just like to say, could you please be brief, because we've had a couple of questions, and Masumi, I know you have another engagement, so would you like to go first?
Okay, thanks, Hira. So I'll keep it very brief. I'll say from our perspective, we need to move away from that model of partnership, which is very utilitarian, where we see local faith actors as service providers. We are co-opting their resources because that kind of gives us access to hard to reach faith communities, and also using them for remote implementing, particularly in risky areas, and transferring risks to them. So this goes against the entire principle of localization. So what is localization is actually giving leadership and decision-making power to local organizations, and in that process, creating a sustainable civil society in those areas. So yes, there is a need to build the capacity of faith leaders and local organizations for them to become better humanitarian responders and provide better development initiatives. But at the same time, there's also a need to develop them as advocates on critical issues like gender, like peace building, like refugees, xenophobia, Islamophobia. And in that process, they can also provide a positive challenge or to kind of some theological practices, beliefs, and the distortion of faith that has occurred, and which very often is a kind of a sticky point when it comes to engaging with faith actors, because this whole distrust that faith is a problem. So hence faith has no role to play in humanitarianism or development. So we need to get away from that. So I will have to jump out, but I'll just take this opportunity to thank you and Zabir and also JLI and Emma as well for giving me the opportunity to speak, and best wishes with the rest of the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Masumi, for incredible insights.
Bye.
Bye. And now, Nonglak, would you like to quickly say something?
For me, we should increase local actors, local face-based organization in the development and the humanitarian assistance, and also make it simple as much as possible, and provide a space that we can share value among the international actors and local face-based organization, and simplify things, not make things like too complicated, in order to improving the work together, and for example, reduce those paperwork. And in the Buddhist, I would like to last but not least, in Buddhist, we practice the Kalyana Mitra. The meaning is like the friendship that allow us to listen deeply to what people say, and also provide an opportunity to like reflect and give the feedback to each other, and then share the resource and the role and responsibility. I think this kind of thing that from international actors and local actors can be working together as the Kalyana Mitra in the Buddhist way. That's what I want. Thank you so much.
Sorry, that was muted. Dr. Swathi Zabib, would you like to give a final remark before we move on to questions?
Thank you so much. So here I would like to share one very common examples that we are usually practicing. Whenever we are going to any place, before going, we pray. But why we pray always? We pray because of the safety. So here, for societal safety and the humanitarian assistance, if apart from your any religious belief, if you pray every day, and we can create this kind of positive energy to the student, to the researcher, to the field worker, to the practitioners, I'm sure any kind of negative vibes or negativity will be absorbed automatically. That is one point. So starting a day with a meditation is very important role for the society. Because apart from the organization, we all are individual. So this is the organizational role. And here, if we are talking about the elements of the faith-based engagement contribute or to make the complicated scenario for the localization efforts, sometimes it is creating the complications because of the religious affiliation. That is one very, very important point, at least for India, because while doing any sort of humanitarian assistance, they would automatically focus on the name of the particular organization that from which this money or funding is coming from. That is one point. So the policymaker, they are very, very, very trying to be very, very secure in terms of from which source the funding is coming. That is one point. And nowadays, the scenario has been totally changed. So that is funding is one of the greatest issue that we need to address. But if we can put it forward with a very positively, that this funding is coming for the humanitarian assistance and developmental work, not for the spreading of any religious beliefs, I'm sure if we can convince and we can commit to the society, I'm sure this problem would be solved. So here I would like to address only this point, and looking forward with this, Zabib.
Just in the interest of time, because I know we're running out of time really quickly, we actually received 2 questions, but we only have time for 1. So I'm going to be addressing it to the panelists, and whoever would like to answer it, please go ahead. So the question is, the involvement of clergymen or religious actors in humanitarian work is still limited. And in the case of working on this matter, what are the controls that must be observed to do what is beneficial for intervention and for humanitarian work, and not to fall into excess and misunderstanding and far from the purpose of their involvement? And this question was actually asked by Mohammed, and he was asked in Arabic, but it's been translated to English.
Can I pick it up? Try it?
Yeah.
Yep. I think the best way we can, or the other way we can actually have, say, build, increase the response of local faith actors is by having an open conversation. Let's try to have an open conversation with our leaders, with fellow humanitarian workers, that to explain, so that they can be explained to the role that local faith actors play, the role that religious leaders play, because it's true that religious leaders do marvelous work. It's only that the work is not recognized. And that could be the reason as to why there is always a line of blockage that looks like blocking religious leaders from doing their job, because the communities or the leaders think that they are going to change people's religion, they are going to promote the, let's say, Islamic religion or Christianity in the communities. But if we have an open dialogue, an open conversation on one-on-one, people will come out with better solutions on how we can go about some of the challenges and on how we can increase the work of faith actors. On the other side of recommendations, Hira, if you can allow me, I want to say that there should be an inclusion and participation of local faith actors, especially in decision-making on what they can do best or what the donors want them to do. There should be that inclusion in decision-making and participation for local faith actors. Not just that people think of a project somewhere and they bring it and say that local faith actors can respond to this. Yeah, and then we should also have a transparency and accountabilities on issues that affect local faith actors. Because if we don't have such transparent and accountability conversations around what affects local faith actors, then we will continue to be suppressed and pressed down, and our work will not be seen. So I also would like to lastly say that we should acknowledge that response through local faith actors will increase accountability to donors and beneficiaries, as it is evident to suggest that localization of humanitarian response is crucial, especially for countries like South Sudan. And I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Zabib. Nongwak, would you like to have any final remarks towards the question? Or in general?
I do agree with what Zabib just sharing. So open the dialogue, talk to each other, and open mind, and we start hearing each other, deeply. What people want, what we want, what you want, and then we can find ways from when we open and start to listen and talk to each other. That's what I.
Thank you so much for that. And that's an incredible note to end the webinar on. And it was a pleasure to meet all the panelists, and thank you to everyone who has attended. If you have missed the conversation or would like to watch the webinar again, please make sure to keep an eye on KAICIID's YouTube channel. It will be uploaded there. And thank you again to all of our speakers and partners at KAICIID, and especially the audience for participating in the event. And because we want the series to be led by you, we would like to invite you to fill out the survey, which will be in the chat. And we want to capture your feedback and ideas, so we are all together, part of this all together, and it'll help develop future webinar series. And we hope to see you at the next one. Keep an eye out on our social media accounts for new announcements. And thank you so much for joining us, and have a great day.